Hello, I'm Declan Carey, and this is the Redaction Politics Podcast. In this episode, first we're going to take a look at the US election. We had the vice presidential debate this week. It was quite different to the presidential debate, so we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're also going to look at universal basic income and what that might mean around the world. Let's introduce our guests first. So I'm with James Moules today, our contributing editor, and our reporters Quah and Richard Hansen. We're recording on Saturday night. We don't usually record on Saturday night. It's a bit new for us. Guys, just first, welcome to the show. And how's your week going so far?
Cheers.
Rock and roll. I mean, recording a podcast on Saturday night. I mean, pubs are closing everywhere. So
well, it's not 10 p.m. yet.
No, but come Monday, at 10 p.m. will be the new 6 p.m. So we'll see.
Yeah, we're in the Redaction Arms tonight, and at 10 o'clock, last orders, right? So
Redaction.
No matter where we are in the podcast. Absolutely.
Ends, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Boris will suddenly leave and it's like, no. Pub closing time.
I mean, of course, let's start by going into the big thing that is, hanging over everything at the moment. The US election. It's getting closer and closer to November. First, we had the vice presidential debate. Did anybody stay up late to watch it?
No.
Absolutely not.
Yes.
Mason, you watched it?
Yes. It is the benefit and the burden of having narcolepsy that I have to stay up and watch all the late night debates. So I watched the entire thing in its agonizing glory, and it hurt my soul in a way that the other debate was not able to. I've looked up some of the polls after the debate, and I'm gonna be honest, I actually kind of disagree with a lot of the pollsters on this one, because I see it as a victory for Pence. I think that Pence dodged every question that he was asked by the moderator, openly and overtly, but I think that he managed to play it off as a strength. He about the deaths of the pandemic, and he would say, that's a very important question, but I'm going to talk about ISIS. And then he would rattle off a dialogue tree that he'd rehearsed several weeks in advance.
Well, that was always the case with Pence, wasn't it? It was to be the counterbalance to Trump's sort of manic erraticism. He'd be the guy who will actually answer the questions. And, that's exactly what he presented at the time.
And it's the age-old thing that they say to politicians: never answer the question that's put to you. Always answer the question that you want to answer.
Yeah.
And I think Pence did that in spades. I didn't watch it live because I value my sleep, but I did watch it the next morning when it was still relevant. I mean, my vice presidential debates are always, do no harm affairs. They're very rarely remembered unless there's some massive gaffe, and I can't think of a massive gaffe. Even in recent
when
history.
Sarah Palin was the VP.
Even when Sarah Palin memorized,
her
lines against Joe Biden in 2008. So, I agree with you, Mason. I think Pence had a good night. I think Harris had an okay night, but again, there was nothing really substantial that was going to move the needle. I think though people were still a bit scarred from what happened a week earlier with Trump and Biden, with him incessantly interrupting Biden constantly. It actually felt for me a little bit like I was traveling in a time machine, and I was back in about 2004, 2002, something like that, back in the day when politics was vaguely civil, and you were able to have a nice debate. There was nothing. Nobody was being threatened with jail. Nobody was being screamed at. It was fine. The only thing that we're probably going to remember any length of time from now is the fly that was on Mike Pence's head. And it was interesting that Joe Biden managed to fundraise successfully off that fly. I think there was a website instantly created called flywillvote.com. And if you click on flywillvote.com, you get through to the DNC, the Democratic National Committee's website, which points you towards ways in which you can vote and ways in which you can fundraise for the Biden campaign. So, I mean, yes, it happened. Do no harm, do no foul. Let's move on. We've got we're on the home stretch now until November 3rd, and there's going to be one more presidential debate. There might be two, but I think there'll probably be one.
I mean, I was always disappointed at the lack of Brundlefly jokes on my Twitter timeline. I said this on Twitter. I don't know how many people got that joke.
Oh, what? Sorry?
The Brundlefly.
I'm not cultured enough to even know what that is. Maybe it's because I'm foreign.
The Fly was Jeff Goldblum horror film, David Cronenberg directed.
Sure. Okay.
Where he turns into a fly. That's the whole point of the film.
That's very niche of you, James.
Thank you very much. But no, I mean, you're quite right. The vice presidential debates are always sort of a matter of they don't want to make too much of a noise because most of them will want to be president themselves one day. So they don't want to overshadow the president, but they still want to make enough of an impression that 4 years down the line, they'll be on the podium. I
think a couple of things were important that Harris did. She managed to effectively counterbalance Pence's not interruptions, but when Pence went over time a lot, and when Pence tried to talk over Harris, her Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking line did manage to have a bit of cut through. I think particularly difficult as a woman, particularly difficult as a woman of color. She's got all of this institutionalized stuff working against her, but I think she managed to do really well in sort of shutting him down at the points that he needed to, without appearing like the angry screamy woman that the right on Twitter will be annoyed with.
Well, Pence made a point of being civil there, didn't he say? He made a point of noting this is the historic nature of your nomination.
He did. And like you said, Pence is on the ticket because he is supposed to counterbalance Trump. But ultimately, he has no choice but to run on Trump's record. He stood behind Trump literally for the last 3.5 years, looking at him adoringly when he's said and done all of the things that he has. So, yeah, you're right. He might have a much more polished exterior. But ultimately, he's running on his platform. He has the same sort of views. Some of his views are even more right wing. So, I think don't be fooled. I think he's polished, but I think we're not as used to seeing polished politicians anymore. So, at the end of the day, I think the people that aren't going to agree with him won't agree with him.
Well, the whole idea of the post-politics era has died, hasn't it? It died in 2015 when Bernie Sanders announced his nomination and Trump announced his candidacy, and when Brexit happened in 2016 and when Trump happened in 2016. The post-politics era died in those 2 years.
And now we have populism. There's no sort of left versus right.
The end of history has ended.
The end of history has ended, quite. But I don't think I'd be very surprised if there's any more talk about the vice presidential debate now. It's just an event that happened. We'd tick that box and we're moving on.
Okay. I think it probably was given a bit more attention than we'd normally see from a VP debate, just because both VPs have a high chance of taking the presidency in the next 4 years if whichever person is elected is incapacitated. They're both old. They both have medical issues that could rear up. I think it's a larger problem than it's ever been previously.
Let's bear in mind that the presidential debate stage this time 4 years could be the same as the vice presidential debate stage just now.
True, although I'd be quite surprised if Pence is the nominee. I mean, unless he's taken the reins from Trump, like you say, Mason, because Trump has died or something.
It depends what direction the Republican Party decides to go after Trump, assuming Trump loses, which, let's face it, he's probably going to.
We're at a nearly double-digit lead, I think, for Biden.
Yeah, double-digit nationally.
Well over double-digit lead. He had a 16-point lead in one poll, didn't he?
One poll gave him a 16-point lead. There was another that gave him a 14-point lead. But yeah, the average, the 538.com average, I just checked before we came on air, and it's Biden plus 10.1. And if you look at his lead in most of the important battleground states, he does have quite a significant lead. But then again, if you look at most of the models which predict the outcome at the moment, Trump has maybe a 15 out of 100, so 15% chance, 17% chance or so of victory. So if you rolled a six-sided die, you've got about as much chance of rolling a 6 on the first try as Trump does for victory. So I mean, it's not over. Biden is certainly far ahead, and Trump has to do something quite fundamental to change this race. But equally, how many times have you rolled a dice and thought, you know what? Oh, I hope it's a 6. It's a 6. It does happen occasionally.
You're giving me flashbacks to my Warhammer days now.
You're giving me flashbacks to XCOM.
Well, quite. I mean, equally, if you play Russian roulette, you know, there's six bullet chambers, 6 bullet holes in a gun chamber, and I wouldn't want to take those odds. So, like I said, the race isn't over, especially now that Trump seems to be on the mend. With
I want to touch on a little bit just before we get a bit further into it is what did we learn about those two candidates as people during this debate? Obviously, during the presidential debate, we learned a lot, or maybe not learned a lot, but maybe confirmed a lot of what we already knew. Did we learn anything new from the vice presidential candidates from this debate that we didn't know already?
No, not really.
No, there wasn't really any time for them to start touting their record. I mean, we know that Harris was a prosecutor and that she was the Attorney General of California, and we knew that Mike Pence was governor of Indiana and in Congress. So no, not really. But I think it was more a case of those two touting the record of the person at the top of the ticket.
Has it changed anyone's opinion as well on the Trump debate, the Trump and Biden debate? Having seen this one and how civil it was, does it almost make Trump and Biden's debate come across as even worse after that?
I'm not sure it does, only because it happened afterwards. I think it probably depends on what happens next. Very few people watch the VP debate in comparison to the presidential debate. I think we had 70 million tune in the US alone for the presidential debate. I don't know what the numbers are for the VP debate, but they'll be half that at least. Yeah. And you know, the fact that the polls didn't really move after it either. I mean, there has been some movement in the polls this week, but that's in my opinion to do with the fact that Trump was diagnosed with COVID and because he had such a terrible performance in his own debate. So I don't think that too many minds have been changed one way or the other.
I think the one potential negative outcome is just that there may be a segment of the electorate that, you know, have watched this debate, and it sort of gives them the romanticized notion about the time when civility politics was in full force and things were better then. And, you know, that's
and history hasn't ended yet.
Yeah, that's line of rhetoric that can lead to some dark places, you know. We don't want people 4 years from now just voting for the person who speaks softly while drone striking children.
Indeed.
Well, that was the whole Obama era, wasn't it? It's like, oh yes, he's nice and likable, yet, you know, how many bombing campaigns has he done despite winning the Nobel Peace Prize?
Absolutely.
I think it was Christopher Hitchens who said giving Obama the Nobel Peace Prize was like giving someone an Oscar in the hope that they'd make a good movie.
Yeah, but Obama was obviously very good at having that front. You know, his PR campaign was second to none.
Oh yeah, hence he was a relatively obscure senator who managed to beat Hillary Clinton to the Democratic nomination in 2008.
I wonder if, speaking of Hillary Clinton, I wonder if anybody saw this week that, was it Bill Barr has said that he's going to be releasing some more emails from Hillary Clinton's private emails.
Are we still talking about Hillary Clinton?
It's been 4 years.
She's not. Look,
the American people are sick and tired of hearing about your damn emails.
Mr. Attorney General, if you're listening, she's not on the ballot. It's not going to make any difference. You know, as far as I can see, it's Biden and Harris. So release as many emails as you like. I'm not quite sure if that's going to make a scrap of difference. But I did see it in the news this week.
Oh, no, I was going to say Joe Biden had hair plugs, isn't it?
Well, we all know that Joe Biden has had hair plugs. If you look at footage of him from the 70s and 80s when he's a lot thinner on top than he is today. But, you know, nothing wrong with that. I mean, who knows what Donald Trump cosmetically has had.
Well, yeah.
And
that's not even starting on how much he spent on spray tan over the years.
I think it is, you know, I think this does sort of highlight, though, a pronounced element of Trump's rhetoric, that he's not able to get over all of the previous presidential candidates that he's faced off against or had tiffs with. You know, he'll be talking to Joe Biden, and he'll be talking to Joe Biden as if he's talking to Bernie Sanders, Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton in a trench coat. It's a little bit ridiculous.
And Ted Cruz and Jeb Bush and people who he defeated on his own side even. Yeah, so you're right. With the possible exception of Lindsey Graham. But yes.
Of course, there is going to be, planned another debate between Trump and Biden. And it was announced that was going to be virtual. Of course, Trump then refused to take part in a virtual debate. How do we see that playing out?
So Trump has one play, and that play is double down, triple down, keep punching. So we know that having a debate virtually is not going to play into that strategy. So it's unsurprising that he did that. I think I may have had a conversation with you, James, on Twitter. I think just before that happened, and you made a comment about how it was announced that it was going to be virtual, and then I think I commented that if he accepts that, I'll eat my hat. And then 20 minutes later, he announced that he wasn't going to debate.
Your hat is going to be intact, isn't it?
I think my hat's going to be intact. Look, I mean, the debate's now no longer going ahead for obvious reasons, because the Biden campaign have said we're not going to be debating you while you're potentially still contagious, and that's, I think, absolutely fair enough. I don't care where you are on the political spectrum. Safety should come first, and I think it's an error for the Trump campaign, because he needs this time. As we speak, he's currently having a rally on the south lawn of the White House, which is traditionally not used for campaign activities, but there we are.
It's if we've got emperor, isn't it?
Indeed. So, he needs time to get out in front of the American people, excuse me, and try and change this race. So I think he really has shot himself in the foot. There'll probably be one more debate on, I think, the 22nd of October. The Trump campaign did ask the Biden campaign if they could have another one on the 29th, kind of as a substitute. But the Biden campaign said no, and they don't need it. So I think there's just going to be one more opportunity for Trump to try and change this race, and I'm not sure he's going to have enough time.
I'm interested to ask everyone here. I mean, of all the times you've been following American presidential elections, or even look through history, when do you think a debate's actually changed anything?
Ronald Reagan, 1980. If you look at polling, him and Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan ran over the top of Jimmy Carter in that debate, which was only a week or so before the election. And similarly, Kennedy v. Nixon.
I was about to say Kennedy v. Nixon's the obvious example, but
but more recently, you had the issue with George W. Bush looking at his watch, halfway through a debate. George H.W. Bush, yes, in 1992. But those instances are few and far between. And
looking at your watch, such a crime. Mocking a disabled reporter on camera. That gets you elected, doesn't it, if you're Donald Trump?
Well, it's a different era now, isn't it? 2020 is very different to 1992. But yeah, like you say, I'd be very surprised if anything changes as far as, in terms of the needle with debates, unless there's some massive gaffe. It's pretty obvious what Trump's strategy was in the first debate. He was just simply trying to get Biden to crack. And he didn't do that. So if I was Joe Biden, I'd probably expect more of the same from the president whenever they face off next. And simply all he has to do is just take the punches for 90 minutes, and he'll come out just in as good a place as he was before.
Yeah, I think one thing that we should include, just on the subject of presidential debates that have influenced politics, I'm going to put forward the example of Al Gore, because while I don't think Al Gore's speeches and presentations actively harmed his shot at the presidency, I think the way that they were framed and the memes that spawned around him definitely did. And I think that's something that we can see years later being amplified over time. We talk about how Trump got memed into the White House. This is actually a trend that's been going on for 20 years. Bush Jr. got elected on the meme that he'd make a better drinking buddy. Not many people remember that one.
No, I agree. Yeah. Who would you rather have a beer with, rather than who do you think is the best leader of the country? I don't think that's the case this time, simply because of the baggage that Trump has. It's a unique. Well, it's not unique, but it's an election with an incumbent. An incumbent is seeking re-election, as opposed to in 2000. I know Al Gore was vice president, but there were two relative unknowns to the national political stage.
I mean, I was talking to a friend recently who was a bit older than me. I mean, I was 8 years old in 2000, but I was talking to a friend. I know. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a bit older than me, and he was saying sort of the thing you wouldn't guess watching the sort of 2000 debates is that just how bitterly fought that campaign was. The debates themselves seemed really innocuous and really bland.
Yeah, I mean, it was
compared to how bitter the campaign itself was, especially after during the recount.
Yeah, I mean, it was the closest election that the US has had in the history of its republic. But similarly, if there's a close election in 2020, that campaign's going to seem innocuous in comparison.
I mean, I don't see it being so close in terms of what the actual result's going to look like. It's just a matter of what, with the mail-in ballots, it's going to be the appearance on the night. Yeah,
if the polls hold and stay true, then we may even have a winner on election night. But it's 7 points. He's got 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Things can change. If you look back 4 years ago,
take a heck of a swing to come from being 16 points down in 3 weeks.
To be 16 points
up in 3 weeks, yeah.
Absolutely. But you've got to remember that polling averages, I'm going to say that Biden is 10 points ahead, not 16. I'm going to say that's a slight outlier if you average the polls.
Fair enough.
And you've got to remember that Trump has about a 3-point advantage in the Electoral College. So I think he can lose the popular vote by around 3 points, up to about 3 points, maybe 4, depending on where he does that. And he can still win in the Electoral College. So really, you only need 6-7 points to come back from. And if you look at 4 years ago, roughly now, where we're looking at the Access Hollywood tape, ABC Wall Street Journal, I think, released
polls
a poll.
Were closer then, though.
But ABC Wall Street Journal immediately after that released a poll. I think it put Clinton 11 or 12 points ahead.
That was
I'm just playing. Yeah, I know, and I'm just playing devil's advocate. And I know, the James Comey letter, I think the 24th of October, changed matters dramatically. There was a much higher undecided, a much higher third-party rate, and equally many of the undecideds broke for Trump. Trump's behind women. Yeah. Trump's behind in the black vote, the Latino vote. So it's certainly a much more of an uphill battle for the president. But I'm not gonna say it's over until it's over.
I mean, I think there are 2 points there. I mean, one is a slightly cheap point from the UK. Obviously, it's a massively different electoral system. Is that, let's bear in mind, in 2017, 6 weeks before the election, the Tories were 24 points ahead. It ended with them being 2 points ahead. Yeah. And a hung parliament. Second point to make is, I think a lot of people who were voting for Trump in 2016, even after that Hollywood Access tape came out, I think a lot of people who were already voting for Trump had already accepted that he was probably quite an awful human being.
Yeah, and he didn't have a record to run on, and he obviously does now. To go to your 2017 point. I mean, that's, in my opinion, just goes to show how much of a terrible campaigner Theresa May was. I mean, I think Jeremy Corbyn had some lucky breaks there. With I think it was the aged care debacle. I mean, lost.
Theresa May still increased the Tories' share of the vote by 6 points in that election.
She did. But I think she did very well to bring those numbers closer together. But yeah, you're right about Trump, though. I mean, if I, like I've said before, if I was a betting man, which I am, I'd be putting my money on Joe Biden.
I think the one thing that we do need to remember is that, we've talked about how there's wiggle room through the Electoral College and through how things can change in the remaining weeks. But the other thing that we need to take account of is that there's going to be additional wiggle room just through electoral interference from the White House. Trump has said ahead of time that he is probably not going to step down peacefully. There's not going to be a peaceful transition of power, which means that if the election results are anywhere in any way close or contestable, he is going to do everything in his power to try and hold on to his office.
Absolutely. Yeah. The only way that he might go slightly more quietly into the night is a Biden blowout. And personally, I think if there is an electoral college landslide, if Biden wins 400 plus electoral votes, which is not beyond the realms of possibility, you might even see Trump resign on the night and make Mike Pence suffer through the transition and the lame duck session of Congress. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, could you see Donald Trump standing arm in arm with Joe Biden on January the 20th? Could you see?
I mean, he might not turn up, but all the same.
It's unlike it would be like Donald Trump to cut and run when things got tough. There's been instances in the past. It's like filing for bankruptcy and starting again. I just can't see him being a lame duck president. If like you're right, Mason.
Even if only for a month.
Yeah, well, time will tell, and I think it'll be very sensational. But it would make for great TV. And you've got to remember who Trump is fundamentally. He's a showman. He's a TV producer. So yeah, you never know. He might try and upstage Biden.
I'm going to try and bring TV analogies into this again, and I'm probably going to fall flat. But who's seen American Horror Story Coven?
I have, but a long time ago.
Yeah, he'd be sort of the Jessica Lange character in that.
Yeah, no, fair. I saw another interesting TV analogy today. The West Wing are doing a reboot episode on HBO, which comes out I think in 5 days' time. And I saw Aaron Sorkin, who's the director, being interviewed by Stephen Colbert, and he was talking about Donald Trump, and he said, I don't think Donald Trump is going to be made into too many TV movies or TV series, because it's not possible for him as a character to learn anything. You can't go on a journey with him. Somebody who has remained the same since probably the first grade. It's very boring as a character. So it'll be interesting to see what might happen.
He's more a side character, isn't he?
Exactly, and it's very hard to be the side character when you are in a universe of one and you currently are the president of the United States.
And it's one of the reasons why he's kind of innocuous to parody, because look, Trump himself is funnier than Alec Baldwin is Trump.
Oh, yes. Right. Great.
One thing to get your thoughts on them. If Trump loses, what do we see him going off to do after that as a former president? Do we see him trying to have a role in presidency or influence politics, TV?
Yeah, he'll have his own TV. He'll have his own TV network, in my opinion. Trump TV. He'll do what he planned on doing in 2016.
For goodness sake, Trump TV is actually going to be a thing.
I think depending on the state of his finances leaving the White House, he might not be able to claw together quite that much. Like he is in a pretty bad state and is pretty much only being held together because every media appearance he advocates for a company that he owns shares in, and that's pretty much the only thing keeping him afloat.
Oh yes, he's in.
So yeah, he'll probably do like the talk show circuits afterwards, but I don't know how much further he'll get beyond that.
Yeah, but I don't see him just going quietly into obscurity. I don't see him doing what every other president has done, at least initially.
Yeah. Whatever else happens, he'll still have Twitter.
Twitter will still have him. But that's another thing to consider. I get back to my resignation point. We're talking about Trump being in trouble criminally. He could potentially arrange a deal with Mike Pence to say, look, I'm going to resign and you can pardon me before Biden takes office. Constitutionally, there'd be nothing that could be done about that.
Yeah.
And it would take away the whole "is it possible for me to pardon myself" argument.
Here's a troubling question. What if Trump loses and then he has a lot of free time in his hands? We know that he is reportedly close with people like Nigel Farage in the UK. They've met on a number of occasions. We
have to talk about Nigel Farage, please.
We know he has Scottish heritage. Do we see him potentially coming to the UK? And
I mean, I think if he's going to come over here, I think it's going to be to play golf.
Yeah,
not a lot more. I think the only other reason that he would come over here would perhaps to have an audience with Her Majesty, and I guarantee she's going to want nothing to do with him when and if he leaves office. So no, there's a rather large ocean separating us and the President of the United States, and I really hope that it remains that way.
And I think the British population at large, if I remember the polling correctly, the British population at large just hates Trump too much for his ego to ever reach the heights that it would need to here.
Yeah, absolutely right. Trump needs his adoring fans and to have oxygen because apparently his lung capacity is reduced now. But that's why his talk show circuit, Fox and Friends, Trump TV, he's gonna stay there.
Yeah, YouGov poll, even among Leave voters, 45% Joe Biden to 25% Donald Trump. As among Leave voters, which is supposed to be an equivalent phenomenon.
And is it all UK about 13% Trump, something like that?
13% to 61%.
Yeah. So yeah, he's not gonna come over here. I hope.
Yeah. To carry on like the God Emperor analogy that's used a lot around Trump. The way I see this ending is that his presidency ends. He is carried out on his golden throne, and 10,000 souls of his adoring fans are sacrificed to him each day through online donations and fundraising or whatever to barely keep his businesses afloat.
And we don't have very long to wait to see what's going to happen. And I know we're talking about when he leaves, he could get re-elected by means illegal or illegal.
Well, yeah, we don't often consider this possibility.
Yeah, I think
he might actually win.
Yeah, he might actually win, or he might steal the election.
Yeah, and not an 85 or 90% chance is never a guarantee. We've known that for 4 years. Yeah. Statisticians have known it for even longer. But
with Warhammer, I've known that when my Tyranids got taken out, but
although
Tyranids,
I think it is important to remember that. I think it's important to remember, though, that a lot of the polling methodology has been altered from 4 years ago. They're placing a lot more emphasis on undecided voters, weighting things correctly. But yeah, you're right. I mean, the New York Times gave Hillary Clinton an 85% shot at winning on election day. And we all know what happened there.
I mean, as you look, 538 is often the one that's cited as, even though they got it wrong, as almost everyone did, they were the ones who got it closest.
Yeah, 538 had it at about 70-30 on election day, I think. Maybe it was slightly even, it was 70.
It was roughly that.
71-29 or something. So yeah, I mean, and Nate Silver has
roughly sort of a 1 in 3 chance.
Yeah, and Nate Silver now has it at 85-15, which is a 1 in 6 chance. So again, not impossible, but I'd be betting on.
In 08, Nate Silver got all but one state correct. In 2012, he got every state correct.
Yeah, and also I think if you think about our general election in 2019, during the campaign, everybody was thinking, oh, are the polls going to be wrong? Or is it going to be a hung parliament? Or what? How?
Were that many people saying that?
Well, there was definitely chat about this. Then, if you looked at the betting markets as well, they were certainly giving a hung parliament a much higher percentage chance of happening than it did. And then 10 o'clock rolled around, and we were like, oh, Conservatives 360 plus, Labour 200, and all the polls proved correct. So I'm hoping, just for the sake of polling and the sake of democracy in general, that what we're seeing in the polls in the lead up to the election is is the result that we're going to see. So I think it's also important to remember that so many people are voting early. So many people have already voted. North Carolina, Florida, I think something like 50% of the state have already will cast a ballot before election day. Yeah. More than 50%. And so those numbers are already there. So any polling that comes out now is not taking that. That's removed from that. So it's actually even harder for Trump to come back from if a certain percentage of people have already voted.
A lot of people are saying that with Hillary Clinton, though, that early ballots will benefit her.
But there weren't enough of them. With COVID-19 has just changed that exponentially.
Although the thing that we then need to recognize there is the increasing rhetoric towards trying to suppress early voting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But on the flip side of that, I think there's the machine kicking into action to ensure that the vote is being got out. But yeah, you're right. Polling places are being this poll watcher kind of situation in Pennsylvania, which I think has been ruled unconstitutional.
I'm pretty sure it's in the same legal territory as a bunch of Klansmen in hoods just standing outside the polling station, glaring ominously at people.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's voter intimidation, plain and simple. But yeah, you're right. It's not an insignificant thing. But I would like to hope the optimist in me would like to hope that as many ballots can be counted as possible.
I wanna raise a thought experiment. What will the United States of America look like this time in 2024 if Trump is re-elected?
Well. In terms of, so the Supreme Court will have ruled on Roe v. Wade, and
let's remind Stephen Breyer is in his 80s now. He's one of the other liberal justices on the court. He may well not last the next 4 years.
Yeah, I agree.
And after he's gone, I mean, most of them are, by Supreme Court standards, relatively young, and probably won't be another new vacancy for a while.
Yeah, I think I think we've only seen, the introduction. I think a lot of what Trump has done or attempted to do in the last 4 years has had an eye on re-election. If Trump doesn't ever have to face re-election ever again, he'll do whatever he wants, however he wants it. I think the thought is actually too worrisome to even comprehend. Actually,
I think the thing that it's really troubling for is you think about minorities, especially. That's a really bleak future.
The Trump presidency has been the scariest it's ever been this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think
the thing that I do think we need to remember, though, is that for one thing, we don't know if a second term of Trump will be the last term of Trump.
Yeah.
He has talked about trying to give himself a third term because Big Meanie Obama said something nasty on Twitter that took him 4 years to recover from mentally. And
if he has a Supreme Court that's willing to rule it's sort of in his favor on a consistent basis, you just never know what's possible. I mean, Gilead from Handmaid's Tale is the kind of territory that we might be in 2024.
I think the other thing that we do need to remember is that even if Trump wants to do whatever it is that he wants to do, fire trans people out of cannons, punt babies, whatever, he's politically incompetent. Like, he isn't able to actually use the mechanisms of the state to achieve his goals all that effectively.
Yeah, the question is how much he manages to realign the structure in his favor and in the favor of the evangelicals going forward.
How many appointments can he make that will exist beyond his presidency and his lifetime? We've seen a lot already in 4 years. We'll see more in another 4 years. The big threat of a Trump re-election is the precedent that it sets for the movement that he is the God Emperor of.
Yeah, though you've got to, I suppose, consider, Declan, in your question, I suppose, if Trump is re-elected, but also if the Republicans hold the Senate, obviously all of his appointments have to be confirmed. I think if there was a Democratic Senate and Trump was the president, of course, it's a big if, he would find it a lot harder to get any of his appointees through. But there'd be certainly, you'd just end up ruling by executive order in the same way.
Supposedly the map this time around favors the Democrats, much like in 2018 it favored the Republicans massively. At the same time, even if you look at the numbers, it's still not overwhelmingly in the Democrats' favor.
No, but the shortest odds have the Democrats winning 51 seats and the Republicans winning 49 seats, which would obviously.
And what it means is Joe Manchin needs to vote with the Republicans, and
exactly. So anything's possible. But then again, if Biden's in the White House, then the Republicans would need 2 to cross the floor.
Because Kamala Harris would.
Yes, of course. But if they had 49 seats, plus 2 Democrats, that's 51 to 50 Democrats. So, it's still going to be relatively close. But I would think that the Democrats will control the Senate in 2021.
One thing, just before we move on to our next topic of the show, let's now think, if we're going to put our neck on the line at this stage, like in earlier episodes, who do we think is going to take it? Now, for me, I remember
the presidency.
Yeah. So for me, I think about a month ago, maybe more, when we first started talking about this topic, I thought Trump would do it. I thought he, second term, he'll get through. Now, having seen everything that's happened, I think I'm going to change my mind and go for Biden. I think at this stage, I think it's looking more likely for a Biden victory. What do you guys think? Let's start with Mason, for example.
As much as I wish the answer to this question was verb and supreme, I'm going to say Biden. I think Biden's going to take it.
Sorry, I'll show up. Sorry.
Why do you think Biden?
At the moment, he's got so much momentum behind him. The COVID crisis continues to be mismanaged. Trump himself is currently unable to campaign effectively because of his own diagnosis. Now, he's trying to take steps to get around that, but that's him holding a rally on the White House lawn isn't going to actually bring anyone to his side that isn't already a diehard fan. The only people that Trump is still able to sort of sell himself to are the people that already believe in him, and there aren't enough.
Okay. Yep. Richard.
Biden by roughly Obama levels of 2008. So 350, 360 electoral votes. And I agree with Mason as the reasons why, because Trump doesn't have enough undecideds. There aren't enough undecideds left in the election. There are too many people that have voted early. And Biden is at 50% or above in a lot of important swing state polls. So I'm gonna stay with Biden.
Okay, James, you're going to go with the trend or what's the trend?
I am going to say this, as I alluded to in the last time we talked about the election on this podcast. I think if it weren't for the pandemic, I think Trump would be on course for landslide re-election. As it is on the current numbers, I'm going to go bold and say Biden landslide. He's even going to take states like Georgia. I'm going there. I'm going there.
You're going there. I'll buy you a beer, James. If Georgia goes blue, I'd love it too.
That is on the record.
Yeah, it's on the record.
I will buy you a beer if I'm wrong.
All right.
So,
Okay. It sounds like we're all agreed. Biden landslide. Packs the courts on day one. Changes the flag.
FDR, isn't it?
Yeah.
Change the flag.
Changes the flag to black and veg.
One step at a time.
Biden.
Okay, yeah, brilliant. So, I mean, that's a big change from when we've been talking about this in previous episodes. So, yeah, let's see what happens. And we've got it on record. So, for the next time in the Redaction Arms, we know who's
I'm not necessarily happy about a Biden landslide. I mean, I remember seeing this a while ago that, I'm not a Biden fan. I said this a while ago, not on this podcast, but I said, if the Democrats nominate Biden, they deserve to lose again. And I stand by every word of that. At the same time, I want Trump to lose more than I want Biden to lose. And that's basically my stance.
I disagree with you. Only not necessarily on policy or on substance, but I personally think that one of the only people that would have been able to beat Trump is Biden. I think if somebody on the left had been the Democratic nominee, in my opinion, they wouldn't have been able to convince enough moderate Republicans to come onto his side, and that's kind of frankly who Biden needed, really.
But they might have convinced more people who might not otherwise have voted.
Maybe, indeed, and that's where
I think we may respectfully disagree there.
Yes, sure, absolutely. But I just put that one on the record.
Yeah. Okay, great. Let's move on to our second topic for today. There's plenty more to talk about for the US election in the coming weeks. We're having a look at universal basic income. I suppose the best way of describing it in its different forms is free money, some people like to say, to citizens. Other people like to say as some kind of state benefit. There's different ways of looking at it. It has been tried in some countries. Some people are very strong advocates of it, believe it will make a big difference. Others clearly not. First of all, let's get our personal views on it. Do we think universal basic income would benefit a country that we live in the UK?
Look, I'm going to say this up front right now. I think from what I've gathered from talking to you all guys before, I think most people are on board with it. So I'm going to shut up now, and for the rest of this podcast, I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Ooh.
Okay, well, I'm going to sing its praises. I think UBI would be transformative in this country, particularly in the circumstances that we're in right now with COVID, with certain industries facing furlough, people facing uncertainty, etc. You would incentivize people to take up to get into professions that might not be particularly well paid, but are still massively necessary in the fabric of society. The NHS would benefit and massively. You'd have more teachers, you'd have more police, you'd have more, you'd have more supermarket workers, you'd have people, postmen, you'd have people that actually contribute to the running of society. You'd also have people that would have time to contribute to volunteer in their community. You'd be able to perhaps go a long way to fix the aged care problem, care workers, and you'd slash the actual benefits bill, because obviously if everybody is receiving, I don't know, £1,000 a month or something, then there's absolutely no need for universal credits. Certain levels of disability benefit would be unnecessary. For me, there's only upsides.
And people would have more purchasing power. Wait, I'm meant to be playing devil's advocate. I'll just throw this one in there.
And just one other thing I want to say on this topic about the purchasing power. So I was living in Australia 2008 2009 when the GFC happened, and our government at the time, led by Kevin Rudd, the Labor Prime Minister, arguably in my opinion one of the best Prime Ministers Australia's ever had in terms of what he's achieved.
From my observer's opinion, I agree.
Yeah. He got together with the Treasurer Wayne Swan and said, right, we're going to give every citizen of Australia $900. Okay, $900 is about 500 quid, just before Christmas. And encouraged us to go out and spend it. Simple as that. So actually, most people bought a plasma screen TV. People called it the plasma payment. But it meant that Australia was the only developed nation in the world to avoid recession. But so we didn't go into recession after the GFC, and arguably the economy only went up with it. I was lucky enough to receive it twice, once because I was a student and once because I was just simply a run-of-the-mill citizen. So I actually received $1,800, and I did my bit. I spent it. I kept the economy going, and it did wonders for the morale of the country as well at a pretty terrible time considering what was happening economically then.
With my Advocatus Diaboli hat on, I'd say this. If we suddenly introduce UBI in this country now, what's to stop landlords bumping up rent and just cancelling that out?
James, I feel like you're reading from the same script as me. I was planning to, when I got around to it, playing the devil's advocate card, talking about rent-seeking behaviour. I feel like I've been thoroughly outmaneuvered. I've been flanked.
Well, what can I say?
Yeah, I mean...
And you're not the one who's on the beer.
Don't you think prices could go up as well at the same time?
Well, that's the thing I'd say is, look, speaking as someone who's in favour of it, I think, I mentioned this on the previous episode of this podcast, I'm in favour of it ultimately, but it has to come as part of a larger package.
Yes.
In and of itself, it wouldn't solve anything.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it initially, you're going to have a lot of people that are going to be like, oh my God, I've got all this free money, and you just kind of quote unquote waste it. But I think that would probably only last the initial kind of 6 months. You got to remember, if you've been given £1,000 a month, then eventually you're probably going to stop using it for things you perhaps shouldn't use it for. It's interesting, you mentioned, would landlords put prices up? I mean, those landlords will be receiving the extra £1,000 a month themselves as well. So maybe we would have a little bit more humanity in society. I
wish I shared your optimism.
Maybe I'm too optimistic, but that's where I come at it from. And if you were able to sell it like that as well, if you were a politician with a bit of courage, then perhaps you could say, look, we're giving you this money and we're trusting you to use it responsibly and to benefit society and your community, and I think the vast majority of people would do that. Like something like the lockdown in March. We had something like 80% support. I mean, when was the last time we had 80% support for anything? So similarly, I think all it would take is people in power to sell it with enough gusto, and I think you'd have success.
Of course, one of the big areas that would benefit will be the arts. It's a problem that the arts, a lot of people don't have the time to practice their skills and become, quite honestly, world-class artists because they have to constantly pay the bills.
Yeah.
Richard, you're a singer, you're an opera singer, right? So. Yeah,
so I worked I'm a journalist now, but I worked as a freelance opera singer for 10 years. So I definitely got some skin in the game in this argument. Absolutely. And if you look at a lot of people getting, I mean, if we're going to exclude the pandemic for now, I mean, I know that's a massive problem, obviously. But before the pandemic hit, if you look at the people that are going to music colleges, going to art colleges, you don't have enough people from working class backgrounds. There's too much. You need a bit of money behind you. Unfortunately, it shouldn't have to be the case. And you're right. So this is another example of how people could be channeling, be going into industries that might not make them millionaires initially, but from my own personal experience, you can, if you work hard, you are able to build up the, ascend the ladder and make a relatively comfortable living doing it and having a lovely time while you're at it. But yeah, you're right. It would be massively beneficial to vast swathes of society. Not to mention people from other countries. I mean, I know we're talking about it as a UK thing, but similarly, the arts is a bit of an exclusive club. If you look at where, particularly, music and where people are come from, and where they've had the opportunities.
Well, you just need to look at it in this country. Who are the big film stars from Britain now? It's Benedict Cumberbatch, Eddie Redmayne, Tom Hiddleston. They all had very privileged backgrounds. Look at it back in the day. Richard Burton, remember him?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was
someone from a far less privileged background as Richard Burton. Look at music. I mean, where did the Beatles come from? Where did Oasis come from? Where did Joy Division come from?
Yeah, from working
class.
What
have we got today?
Yeah, and that's because of the government's systematic dismantling of funding.
Exactly.
In the arts. If you look at the state sponsorship in Germany of the arts, it's just I think they put €1 billion into it at the height of the pandemic to ensure that that the arts survived. And that was just initially, So yeah, you're right. I mean, over the last, probably since the coalition government has come in, you've seen huge amounts of money cut, and it's just absolutely outrageous, in my opinion.
I mean, the arts are not a frivolity; they're a massive part of our economy.
Absolutely right. And what is it? Winston Churchill that said, what's the point of fighting if you don't have anything to fight for? When talking about the arts, is regarding the in the height of the Blitz, and it's very, very difficult for certain people of certain political stripes to see that you're not a money-making machine initially.
I mean, why do you think the Nazis targeted cultural icons in the Baedeker bombings?
Absolutely. So, and I think we are at risk of becoming a bit of a cultural wasteland if current trends continue, which is just makes me unbelievably angry and sad at the same time.
The tragic news there recently was, of course, the Cineworld was announced it was closing.
Yeah,
it's closing all its venues. I mean,
yeah.
I lived in Manchester for 5 years. Massively happy memories of going to the Didsbury Cineworld.
Yeah,
that Cineworld complex. They often did some quite experimental forms. That they had the Screen X. They had the 4D formats. I mean, some might say they're gimmicky, but at the same time, it's a brand new experience.
When I read that,
they have Home as well. All these venues are closing.
I'm
not sure what's actually happening with Home at the moment. I haven't lived in Manchester for a couple of years now, but I mean, you're up north, Richard. What's happening?
Home's still there. I haven't heard of any imminent closures. But when I read about the Cineworld thing, my initial thought was that makes me really sad because I've never taken my 2-year-old to the cinema yet. He's only 2. He's not quite of the age, perhaps, where he can sit through a film. But if he grows up in a world where he's never been able to go to the movies, that's a very, very sad state of affairs.
Absolutely. I remember being a kid, my dad taking me to the cinema in Manchester. It was one of the best memories. I remember seeing the new Star Wars. So that would be very tragic to lose that. I think just for our listeners and viewers, let's just fill in a couple of things. Home is how would you describe it? Independent cinema in Manchester now.
An arts centre.
Theatre complex.
Centre.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been around for a few years. I think 2015 it opened. Very cool place, but it would be such a shame to lose.
Yeah, it would have been 2015.
Of course, but independent places as well. I mean, obviously, Home came from the old. I think it was the old corner house, wasn't it, on Oxford Road?
Yeah, that's right.
Which was an iconic thing. Growing up there, I knew about it. Never went myself. It was a bit before my time, but it would be such a shame to lose things like that.
If we're getting snobby about it, I mean, some of the screens at the corner house were not great, but
part of the experience.
Yeah, exactly. The projection is much better at Home.
There was a bit of a sticky floor in the corner house as well. I remember when I first moved to Manchester, going and seeing a few films there and thinking, goodness me. But yes, you're totally right. It was an absolute icon.
Which was it? Screen 2 and the corner house were notoriously terrible. All the same, it was part of the experience.
Indeed.
I mean, talking about universal basic income, there are lots of advantages to that. These days, is it something that's still a utopian idea? Is it something that's still miles away from existence? Or are we really on the cusp of it, of actually getting something like it with things like, we've seen like furlough. I know it's not a universal basic income, but it's giving a lot of people a lot of money to stay at home.
I mean, Rishi Sunak said on the floor of the House of Commons that he was against universal basic income.
Yeah,
but it's not too far departed from what he's actually doing, is it?
All it's going to take is a set of politicians with some courage, with some backbone to do it.
And that in the US, the Yang Gang, while they eventually lost, managed to lend a lot of credence to the idea of universal basic income, and I think they presented it in a very good way. The technology exists in our current society that we are producing more value than at any point in history, but that value isn't trickling down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very poorly distributed. I mean, the closest that anyone came probably was Benoît Hamon in France, winning around on a basic income platform in the 2017 presidential election. That sort of five-way race, there was a five-way debate before the sort of media rules set in that they had to introduce all the candidates. It was very controversial at the time. They had the five main candidates. It was Macron, Le Pen, Fillon, Hamon, and Mélenchon. And of course, Hamon was standing on a basic income platform and standing against, Thatcher admirer Fillon and having a spar about basic income. You can imagine how that went, but
the argument on the right, which has been the argument for years against it, has been like, oh my God, how much is this going to cost? It's going to bankrupt this country. Now, I think
you're getting ahead of me on the devil's advocate argument there.
I'm saying
we're all devil's advocating ourselves.
But I think now, especially with the pandemic and the responses that various governments have had to make, I think there's going to be less support for an argument like that. People will say, well, sod that. Firstly, I don't think it will cost anywhere near as much as you imagine it would. But imagine the benefits, and imagine how much money could be put back into the community, in the arts, in professions which just so desperately need workers.
I'll be more pessimistic and say I'm not sure how many people will buy that. They'll say, we've bankrupted ourselves already with these furlough schemes, haven't we? We're so much in debt that we're going to need even more austerity. That's what they're going to say.
Or they're going to say, look, we tried austerity and look where it's got us.
I agree with that. Sorry, Mason.
Yeah, I'm going to put forward the same case study that I've mentioned previously. That is actually a very strange one. Singapore, incredibly right-wing country. The right-wing government has, I believe, a 80 or 90 seat majority out of about 100, and they've invested more into the coronavirus crisis than they did into the global financial crisis, and they did that within about a month of it first hitting their shores. If an incredibly right-wing country is able to invest that heavily into their social infrastructure and give that larger windfall to their working class, then Jesus Christ, Britain has no excuse.
I just can't see it in Britain with how I know how conservative parts of England can be. I just can't see how a movement could get over that, because they just have such a strong voice at the moment. I know it's not always like that, but it's always in the background and it's always getting bigger.
I think this is where I would point people towards our left optics episode. It is just a matter of how we can sell it well. I think plenty of people are amenable to the idea if we, communicate the economics well, because that's what most people will say. They'll say, "Where's the money coming from?"
Yeah, I think there we can look again to the Yang campaign. We target those economically disenfranchised northern voters. All of your businesses have been run out. All you've got left are call centers, but those call centers are working for massive companies that are producing large amounts of money, and you should be seeing a return on that beyond just your £8 an hour.
I think the bottom line is dispelling the notion that sort of household finances are equivalent to national government spending.
Yes. No, absolutely.
Yeah, it's an easy sell, the idea that we've got to tighten our belts in hard times.
Balancing a budget as a government is very different to balancing a checkbook because
you can't balance a budget in government. If you stop spending, the economy stagnates.
Yeah, but going back to political will, all it's going to take is a government who is competent with a large enough majority. I think if somebody like somebody like Tony Blair in 1997, there was enough appetite for change in this country then, and he won 200 seat majority, close to it.
It was more than 400 seats.
Yeah, more than 400 seats, and the Tories had less than 200 seats.
For our viewers who don't know, you won more than 400 seats. That's just one party.
Yes. out of 650. If there was another situation where that happened again, then perhaps something like this could get through, simply because it wouldn't matter if people were
I don't see that happening in the near future, but I've been wrong before and I'll be wrong again.
Also, it could happen in other countries which Britain admires successfully, and if it does that, then maybe it'll catch on here.
I mean, look, from what I've talked to people, especially people who voted Brexit, the country they most admire is the United States.
Well, I mean, I don't know whether that's entirely true across the board. I think, yeah, you're right. I think
I'm just talking from personal experience.
Yeah,
so
I think a section
not
of
exactly
voters.
Polling.
Yeah, I mean, look, I put my stripes on the table. I voted Remain. I'd vote Remain again if I had the opportunity. But I also have friends who voted to leave. And some of them had relatively, good reasons for doing that. But I think, if we can engage these voters, like you said, Mason, these northern working class voters, particularly, onto a subject like this, which will genuinely benefit them, then I think we might be onto something.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine someone like Keir Starmer being someone to put forward an idea like this. It doesn't seem, I know we've not heard much from him policy-wise, but the indications that we've got, I can't see it being something that he will put forward. I figure like Jeremy Corbyn, of course, that would be something that wouldn't be such a surprise for him, but he obviously struggled to get that majority. So it's kind of, you're in a hard place, I think, to try and initiate this. I think, as you said, Richard, someone like Tony Blair, but how often does a figure like that come around?
Look, I was speaking with a friend earlier today, and this was literally the first time this thought had crossed my mind. And I was talking to him, we were talking about Clement Attlee, and sort of how Clement Attlee was himself kind of the most bland, uninspiring person you could possibly imagine to lead the Labour Party. And you'd never thought he'd have lead the Labour Party to radical change, but what happened? And look, I'm not someone who voted for Keir Starmer, but this is my optimistic.
I thought you said you were. I thought you were about to say
Keir Starmer government would be.
I thought you were about to say you were not someone who voted for Clement Attlee. Sorry.
It is entirely possible that the instant Starmer gets into number 10. He just sort of, takes the zipper down his face, climbs out, reveals that it was actually Karl Marx the entire time.
I was expecting Corbyn, but that was my bad.
We'll keep the beige flag flying here.
Just imagining the headline in the Sun during the election campaign 2024 of quite literally Starmer standing in the doorway halfway, revealing this red Keir or whatever they'll call him.
Yeah. What's the watermelons? Being on the outside, right on the inside.
Yeah, that's it.
That's why he gave his party conference speech in front of a red brick wall, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yeah. Was it Doncaster, I believe?
But I think getting back to UBI, we've digressed a little bit. I think it'd be really interesting to canvass some opinions of people who might disagree. We're all sitting here largely on the same page. But talk to us. Comment below. Change our minds. Tell us why you don't think it's a good idea. Because I think it's really important to spark this kind of debate in this country, because I think, especially at the moment, with the pandemic and with perhaps no deal Brexit, looming, there's going to have to be some quite radical choices made, and this could be one of them.
Look, one I think quite potent reason people would cite for opposing UBI, even if they support it on economic grounds, is and this is a very loaded term, will personal responsibility be diminished? That people just have this free handout?
No, but I see what you mean. I think there's something in that. Like, I think...
Of course there is, that's why I raise it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with it, but I think you've got a fair point that a lot of people are very proud.
It's not my point, I should clarify. I disagree with it, but...
Yeah, but what I mean is, for example, like, people with, people with disabilities, very, very proud that they go out and earn a wage and earn their income. I think just giving them the money, I don't think that's a good solution for everybody. There has to be some kind of...
It needs to be part of a larger package.
Exactly.
Part of a larger package, but also a figure that's probably not going to be enough to live on in itself. I think it's more, I look at something like £1,000 a month. If you say, £12,000 a year is not a high wage for anybody, so you're probably going to have to supplement that income somewhere.
Basically, 12 a year, isn't it? Minimum wage.
It's a bit more than that now. Minimum wage is £8.72. So I think it's probably closer to £16,000 a year. So it's not far off. But equally,
that's not massively lower than the median wage in this country, which is about what, 22, something like that.
No, it's not.
That's if you're working full time. Not everyone.
Yeah.
I think the point that we do need to remember is that I think that it's going to be an incredibly small number of people in any hypothetical UBI situation that just say, oh, hey, now I can afford to be a NEET, collect their $12,000 a year, and then never leave their home. I don't think those people really exist on the scale that they're sort of represented to when discussion around UBI comes up.
And I think
people need social and people need
And
fulfillment.
Don't bring Ben Shapiro into this. Don't bring Ben Shapiro into this.
Okay. One way that people achieve fulfillment is through going out and doing work. That doesn't have to be paid work. It could be, helping out in their community. It could be any number of things, but it's all things that sort of contribute back into the economy.
It gives you a reason to get up in the morning. If that reason is simply it means that you can stay home with your kids. You can stay home with if you can be a stay-at-home mum, if you want to, if that's what you want to do, then that's great. Like you said, Mace, it doesn't have to be something that pays money. It doesn't have to be something that, contributes, a dollar amount to the economy necessarily. But there's just so much more societal value that we can get out of this. You're right. The personal responsibility argument's would probably come up. But then, I would just say, well, why haven't we closed all casinos? Why don't we outlaw alcohol, outlaw tobacco, outlaw, any kind of personal vice.
How many people would be in favour of all of that?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's if you're going to say, well, people aren't going to spend it responsibly, I say, well, they're not spending it responsibly now. So what's going to that percentage of people isn't going to change.
And I think one thing. We are talking about this being part of a larger package of investment in social infrastructure. And I think an important part of that is going to be investment in education. And that's going to help people to spend that money responsibly. We are talking about not just implementing UBI, but creating a society in which UBI can be implemented.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that would...
Oh no, that Spike Online will be telling you're indoctrinating the children.
I think also the UK has quite a unique situation where there's only a general election in the UK every 5 years, which is a long amount of time, compared to other countries that I've lived, in New Zealand, it's every 3 years, so Australia's every 4.
Okay.
Well, it's not quite, but it's certainly not 5. So, a 5-year parliament, you can get a lot done if you want to, it's the thing. It's entirely possible to do it here where you can lose a bit of you can spend a bit of political capital before you have to run again.
You're just reminding me of a point I forgot to make earlier in this podcast, which I was about to say in the context of American elections. I don't think Americans should see term limits as sacrosanct. I think if we're democratically popular, I think there is a case for abolishing term limits. I mean, we don't have them in this country, and nobody complains about it.
Well, yeah, I suppose so. But then we get back to the argument that we were talking about before. Step 1, get rid of the orange buffoon, and we can start having adult conversations about the makeup of
the term limits
of countries
aren't a factor in that.
No, but you've got Trump who's floating the idea of not ever stepping down and running until he dies.
That's why you'll get sort of even some liberal commentators in America bring up cases against people like Evo Morales and who are abolishing term limits in Bolivia, despite the fact they were enormously popular on a domestic level.
Yeah, it's entirely true. I completely agree.
Yeah, abolishing term limits does not mean that you can just vote yourself dictator for life.
No, you've still got to face
distinction.
You've still got to face the electorate every 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever the term is.
Absolutely.
But yeah, you're right. Like in this country,
Hosni Mubarak had in Egypt. It's like he didn't have presidential elections until quite late in his life. He had what was it? Presidential confirmatory referenda.
What's Putin doing these days?
He has elections, but
kind of the only person on the ballot.
I lived in Salisbury, and I was still living in Salisbury at the time when that happened. That was like 2 weeks before his re-election.
Oh God. But yeah, you're right. Even the most popular leaders.
Well, in this city.
Term limits here. But Bob Hawke, Prime Minister of Australia from 1983 to 1991, had a 75% approval rating at one stage as a premiership, which is just unbelievable. But even he stepped down off his own accord. So yeah, you're right. You can ride high, but you probably lose popularity eventually, no matter who you are.
Well, isn't there a saying, all political careers end in failure?
They do. Well, yeah.
Indeed. Okay. At this point, I think we're going to start wrapping up. We've covered our 2 topics today, and before we do, I want to just give a shout out to our Safe Passage fundraising, because that's still ongoing. So if you've not listened to this podcast yet, we're fundraising for Safe Passage, and we're going to do a live stream of the US election on November 3rd. It's James's birthday the day after. I feel compelled to say for some reason.
I will be turning 28 during the live stream.
And I'll be turning green in the live stream if it goes wrong. But we'll be raising money for Safe Passage. We've already had a first couple of donations come in. We're going to have someone from Safe Passage come on to talk about the amazing work they do. Just small spoiler, but it supports child refugees in destination countries, which is a brilliant cause. So please do, if you can donate anything, do donate that. And come and join us for our live stream. You'll find details on our social media channels. That's Redaction Politics.
Even if you disagree with everything we said in this podcast, please still donate.
Yeah, I mean, that's even more reason. Please, even if you do disagree with everything we say, please donate and come and chat with us, because that would be great to get.
Yes, please come on this podcast, even if you disagree with us.
Leave a comment.
We would love people.
For each donation that is made, I will make exactly one quote to a dead German philosopher.
That's what.
Yeah. You have your incentive.
That's on the record, everybody.
So yeah,
I'm gonna need to prepare a last.
That Word document going.
That one is banned.
And we're already at 7%, so there could be a lot of philosophy going on in this next one. Okay, so thank you very much for tuning in today. If you're listening or watching on YouTube, I've been your host, Declan Carey, and of course I've been joined by James Moules, our contributing editor, and our reporters, Richard Hansen and Mason Quah. That's all from us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining.